I told him I'd cheat if I thought I could get away with it, and everybody acts like that makes me the villain. What they don't understand is that I said it because I already knew I couldn't get away with anything, not even breathing without his permission. My therapist says I'm deflecting responsibility, and maybe she's right, but she also doesn't know about the footage he has of me crying in the shower, or the way he'd quiz me about my panties at the end of each day. If I'm going down for this, I need you to understand that the game was rigged before I ever opened my mouth. By the end of this, you'll see the video evidence yourself, and you'll have to decide if wanting to be free is the same thing as being guilty. I wasn't always this person who measured her words like a criminal planning an alibi. 6 months ago, I was the girl who left her phone face down on restaurant tables and laughed too loud at memes that weren't that funny. Marcus liked that about me, he said. Liked that I was uncomplicated. He traced patterns on my back while we watched documentaries about serial killers and whisper that I'd never be able to hide anything from him because he could read my micro-expressions. At the time, I thought it was foreplay. Now I understand it was reconnaissance. Our problems didn't start with a joke. They started with his ex-girlfriend's Instagram account that he checked every morning before kissing me, and the way he'd ask who was that. About every male name in my contacts. I transferred my vet's office to under Dr. Smith just to avoid the third degree about why the receptionist's voice sounded flirty when reminding me about my cat's appointment. The first camera appeared in the living room after I mentioned my coworker Jake brought me coffee. It looked like a phone charger. I noticed it because I'd bought the same model for my dad last Christmas and knew it didn't have a lens on the front. That's when I started performing my life instead of living it. I'd sit on that couch and text my sister about dinner plans, then delete the messages immediately because Marcus had installed a keylogger on my laptop, and I'd seen the reflection of my screen in the window behind him. I became obsessive about angles and sightlines, which seems ironic now that my most intimate moments are probably saved on some cloud storage folder labeled evidence. The joke came 3 weeks after I found the second camera in our bedroom, disguised as a smoke detector that blinked red at 3 a.m. like a heartbeat. We were fighting about why I'd changed my email password. Marcus stood in the kitchen doorway, blocking my exit, holding my phone that he'd cracked the code on while I slept. He read my conversation with my friend Dree about his divorce, focusing on the part where Dree said sometimes I wish I'd met you first, and I replied with a laughing emoji and you're sweet. Marcus's voice went flat, the way it does when he's decided he's right about something. He said I was emotionally cheating. I laughed, a bitter, desperate sound that didn't feel like it came from my body. I said, if I actually wanted to cheat, don't you think I'd pick someone better at not getting caught? The words hung between us like something radioactive. His face drained of color, then flooded back so fast I thought he might hit me. He didn't. He just set my phone on the counter, very carefully, like it was evidence at a crime scene, and said, at least you're honest about your nature. Then he walked out and didn't come home until dawn. My sister Aisha came over the next day and found me scrubbing the kitchen tile with a toothbrush. She asked if I was okay, and I said I was fantastic, which is the kind of lie that sounds like a cry for help in a certain light. She asked why Marcus had texted her at 2 a.m. asking if I had a history of infidelity. I told her he was being paranoid. I didn't mention the cameras because some part of me believed I deserved them. The hook at this point is that I'd already started documenting his behavior too, screenshots of his accusations, recordings of his late-night interrogations. I was building my own case while he built his. Marcus didn't accuse me directly after that night. Instead, he became weirdly solicitous. He brought home my favorite takeout without asking. He suggested couples therapy with a therapist he found. He installed a new security system for my safety while I was at work, the kind with cameras in every room that linked to an app on his phone. When I asked why the bedroom needed a security camera, he said, so we can catch anyone who breaks in. The subtext being so we can catch you. I started meeting Dree in person instead of texting, which looks more suspicious if you're the kind of person looking for shadows in sunlight. We'd sit in his car in the grocery store parking lot because Marcus tracked my location, and I'd need a receipt to prove where I'd been. Dree would listen to me catalog the cameras I'd found. The USB charger, the smoke detector, the digital picture frame that sent motion alerts, and he'd ask why I didn't just leave. I didn't have an answer that didn't make me sound pathetic. The hook here is that Dree offered me a place to stay, and I considered it for exactly 3 seconds before realizing Marcus would find me by sunrise. By week 4, I'd developed a system. I'd text Dree from my work computer about meeting up, then delete the browser history. I'd pay cash for everything so my card statements would look clean. I'd park 2 blocks away from Dree's apartment and walk, just in case Marcus had hidden a tracker on my car. The irony of becoming the very thing Marcus feared wasn't lost on me. I was sneaking around to talk about how I was being monitored for sneaking around. The hook at this point is that I'd started fantasizing about actually cheating, not because I wanted someone else, but because I wanted to commit a crime worthy of the punishment I was already receiving. My best friend Carmen called me on a Tuesday, which was unusual. Tuesdays were her date nights. She asked if Marcus and I were okay. I said we were working through some trust issues. She said Marcus had called her, asking about my male friends at the gym. I don't have male friends at the gym. I don't even go to the gym. I use a yoga app in the living room, under the watchful eye of the camera disguised as a router. Carmen's voice had that careful quality people use when they're trying to figure out if you're the victim or the accomplice. I told her Marcus was mistaken. I didn't tell her I'd found the 4th camera in the bathroom, hidden in an air freshener that he'd positioned to face the shower. The truth bomb dropped on a Thursday night. Marcus was at his weekly poker game, which I'd confirmed by driving past the bar and seeing his car there like some kind of stalker. I decided to search his home office, something I hadn't done because that felt like crossing a line. The cameras were his line, not mine. I found a folder on his computer desktop labeled Insurance. Inside were hundreds of screenshots, my text messages restored from the keylogger, my search history, and photos, screenshots from the cameras showing me in various states of undress, of me crying after our fights, of me holding my phone at angles that suggested I was hiding something. The metadata showed he'd been compiling these for months, long before the joke. The hook here is that I also found a subfolder titled Carmen that I couldn't open because it was password protected. When Marcus came home, I was sitting in his desk chair, staring at his screen. He didn't look surprised to see me there. He looked satisfied, like he'd been waiting for me to find it. I asked how long. He said since the beginning. He said trust has to be earned, and I'd never given him reason to trust me. I pointed out we'd been together 2 years. He said yes, and look what he'd had to do to keep me honest. The hook at this point is that he confessed he'd showed the footage to his brother, who told him to leave me. The hook at the next level is that I realized he'd been building a case against me for longer than I'd been performing innocence for him. I told him we needed to talk about the camera in the shower. He said, which one? That plural still haunts me, which one? He told me he'd installed 7 total. I knew about 5. The other 2 were in the closet and inside the headboard of our bed. He said, I need you to understand I'm not paranoid. I'm vigilant. I said, I need you to understand I'm leaving. He said, you can't. I have proof you're having an emotional affair. I asked what proof. He played a recording of me in Dree's car, taken from my phone's microphone, which he'd activated remotely. In it, I said, sometimes I think about what it would be like to be with someone normal. That was his smoking gun. The situation spiraled when I tried to pack a bag. Marcus stood in the bedroom doorway, the one with the headboard camera, and said if I left, he'd send the footage to my family, my employer, and post it on Facebook. Not the nudes, the crying ones. The ones where I looked completely unhinged, where I was talking to myself about whether I was crazy. He'd edited them together with my emotional affair audio to create a narrative where I was unstable and unfaithful. The hook here is that he'd already drafted the post, sitting in his Facebook scheduled content, ready to go live if I crossed a geofence he'd set up around our house. I found this out because I'm the one who pays the phone bill, and I saw the SMS notification from the security system app. My worst decision came at 2 a.m., 3 days later. I was trying to sleep while Marcus sat in the living room, watching live footage of me trying to sleep. I got up, walked to the kitchen, and took a knife from the block. I didn't plan to hurt him. I planned to cut the power to the house to make all the cameras go dark at once. What I actually did was worse. I cut the power lines outside, which is apparently a felony, and in the process of doing so, I fell and cut my hand badly enough to need stitches. Marcus filmed the whole thing, including the part where I sobbed that I just wanted 5 minutes of privacy. The hook here is that he didn't call 911. He drove me to the hospital while narrating to his phone about my self-harm episode and how he was seeking immediate intervention. I let him because the alternative was bleeding out in our yard, which presumably would also have been filmed. The hook at the next level came when the ER doctor, a tired woman with kind eyes, asked if I felt safe at home. Marcus was right there, holding my good hand, the picture of a concerned partner. I said yes. She didn't believe me. She gave me a card for a domestic violence hotline disguised as a prescription for antibiotics. Marcus didn't see it because he was uploading the footage to his cloud storage in the waiting room. I still have that card. It's in my wallet, right next to my insurance card that still lists his name as my emergency contact. The irony is a physical weight. The breaking point happened during a dinner party we hosted for his coworkers. I was setting out cheese on a board I'd arranged to hide the living room camera when I overheard Marcus's boss say, "You were right to document everything, man. Women like that will take you for everything." Marcus showed him something on his phone, and they both laughed. I walked into the kitchen and called Carmen, who still wasn't taking my calls. I left a voicemail that said, "I know about the folder. I know about you and Marcus. Please call me back." The hook here is that Marcus had my phone tapped, so he heard the message in real time through the speaker he'd installed under the kitchen cabinet for music. He walked in as I hung up, and his face was empty in a way that made my blood run cold. By 48, my support system had crumbled completely. My sister believed Marcus's version, because he'd sent her a carefully edited clip of me saying Dree's name in my sleep. My work started asking questions after Marcus called HR to express concern about my mental state and provide documentation of my instability. Even my cat seemed to prefer Marcus, which was the final insult. The only person still talking to me was Dree, and only because he was too stubborn to be scared off. He asked me to move in with him again. This time I said yes. I just didn't know how to leave without triggering Marcus's final fail-safe. The hook here is that I'd discovered Marcus had been draining our joint savings account for months, building a legal defense fund against my inevitable betrayal. I had $47 to my name and a credit card he'd co-signed on that he could cancel at any time. The person who got hurt by my continued deception was me, which feels like a deserved outcome. I kept pretending everything was fine, that I was okay with being monitored, that I didn't know about Carmen and Marcus. I smiled for the cameras while planning my escape in a notebook I kept in my car, which Marcus had also bugged with a GPS tracker I didn't find until later. The hook at this point is that I started feeding false information to different people to see what Marcus would repeat back to me. I told Dree I was thinking of getting a dog. I told my sister I was applying to grad school. I told the cashier at the grocery store I was pregnant. Marcus only confronted me about the grad school lie, which told me everything I needed to know about who was feeding him information. The direct question he asked me was, "If you have nothing to hide, why are you encrypting your journal?" I hadn't been. He'd found a password-protected file on my computer called My Thoughts that was actually just a corrupted download of a game I'd never played. He'd spent 3 days trying to crack it, convinced it contained my confessions of infidelity. I told him the truth. He didn't believe me. That's when I realized the truth was no longer a valid currency between us. The hook setting up the biggest revelation came when Marcus sat me down for a relationship audit, his words, and presented a timeline of my supposed affair with Dree. It included timestamps of when I'd left the house, screenshots of my location history, and a chart he'd made correlating my menstrual cycle with days I'd seemed emotionally distant. It was 14 pages long and he'd laminated it. He said, "This is what I'll show the judge when I file for divorce." I said, "We aren't married." He said, "Exactly. Imagine what I'll have on you if we were." Then he told me about the engagement ring he'd bought. He'd planned to propose on our anniversary, he said, but my behavior had given him pause. The hook beneath this hook was that I already knew about the ring. I'd found it in his sock drawer while searching for the key to the locked file cabinet. The receipt was in the box. He'd bought it 6 months ago, before the joke, before the cameras. He'd been planning to propose while simultaneously building a case against me. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. The worst truth, the one I'd promised at the beginning, is that I did cheat. Just not the way Marcus thinks, and not with Dree. After I found the cameras, after I realized I was living in a surveillance state designed by the person who was supposed to love me, I reached out to someone from my past. Not an ex, a lawyer. I started building my own case while Marcus built his, meeting her in the library where our phones had to be silent, and there were no cameras because that would be illegal, though I doubt that would have stopped him. I learned about wiretapping laws and invasion of privacy, and something called revenge porn that applied even if you were in a relationship when the footage was taken. I gathered the evidence of his tracking, his recordings, his threats. I was going to file a police report and a restraining order. I had everything ready to go, then Marcus left. He packed his things while I was at work, the cameras recording his departure for my benefit, I suppose. He left a note on the counter in the kitchen where the camera in the smoke detector could capture my reaction. It said, "I know everything. I have proof. Don't try to find me." He took the engagement ring with him. He also took my cat. The full confession begins here. When I made that joke, I was already planning my exit. Dree was just a friend, but I'd be lying if I said I hadn't imagined what it would be like to be with someone who didn't make me feel like a suspect in my own life. The joke was a test. I wanted to see if Marcus would finally admit to the cameras I knew were there. Instead, he installed more. He left because he thought he'd won. He thought he'd caught me being the unfaithful monster he'd always known I was. The engagement ring was never for me. I found out later, through mutual friends who believed his version of events, that he'd been seeing Carmen for a year. The folder on his computer I'd found titled Carmen contained their vacation photos together. They'd gone to Mexico. I'd been home alone, being watched by 7 cameras, while my boyfriend was building a life with my best friend and documenting my descent into paranoia to justify his betrayal. The footage he has of me is damning only because it's incomplete. Yes, I sound unhinged in those recordings. I talk to myself. I have full conversations with the cameras, asking them if they're happy. I pace at 3 a.m. and trace the walls looking for lenses. I practice my facial expressions in the mirror to make sure I look convincingly normal. He sent clips to my mother, showing me crying in the shower after I found out about Carmen, telling her I was having a breakdown over guilt. My mother forwarded it to me with a message that said, "Honey, I'm worried about you." I didn't respond because what could I say? "Actually, Mom, I'm crying because my boyfriend installed cameras while sleeping with my best friend, and I'm trapped in a house where even my grief is being filmed for evidence." She'd think I was psychotic. The engagement ring was purchased for Carmen, not me. The receipt I found was for a ring size too large for my finger. He'd bought it 2 weeks before the joke, which means while I was being monitored, while I was adjusting my behavior to prove my loyalty, he was already building his new life. The ring is now on Carmen's finger. She posted about it on Instagram, which I saw because I still have Marcus's sister's account password from when we shared a Netflix login. The post said, "With someone who finally sees me." The comments were full of people from our shared life, congratulating them, saying how they always knew you two belonged together. No one questioned the timeline. No one asked where I was in this story. I was the ex who'd become unhinged, the cautionary tale. The consequence of the revelation that hit me hardest wasn't social or financial, though God knows both of those were devastating. It was the realization that I'd spent 2 years performing for an audience that wasn't even watching. Marcus hadn't checked the camera footage in months. He told Carmen in a text I saw when I briefly logged into his iCloud, using the password I'd watched him type 1,000 times. He'd stopped monitoring because he didn't care what I was doing anymore. The cameras were just there to make me believe I was being watched, to control my behavior through the possibility of observation. The actual footage was irrelevant. I was policing myself for a warden who'd already left the prison. But here's the final shoe, the last hidden element I knew about Carmen almost from the beginning. I found a hair on his jacket that wasn't mine, and my first instinct wasn't jealousy. It was relief. I thought, finally a way out. I could be the wronged party. I could leave with my dignity intact. Then I found the cameras, and I understood that leaving wouldn't be that simple. He'd never let me be the victim. He'd make sure I was the perpetrator, so I stayed, I performed. I built my case quietly while he built his loudly. I made that joke because I'd run out of patience for his theater. I wanted to force a confrontation that would reveal his surveillance. Instead, he used it as justification for what he'd planned all along. The aftermath is this: I live in the house we shared because he owns it and I'm not on the deed. He moved in with Carmen and pays the mortgage as support while I get my mental health sorted. He still has access to the security system, though he claims he doesn't check it. I believe this like I believe in Santa Claus. My job gave me a voluntary leave of absence after Marcus sent HR a concerned email with footage of my erratic behavior. They said it was a liability issue. I haven't told them the footage was taken without my consent because I'm still technically a tenant in his property, and I can't afford a lawyer to parse those particular legalities. Dree sends me money sometimes, which I accept because pride doesn't keep the lights on. My mother calls weekly to ask if I'm still having those thoughts about hurting yourself. I don't correct her. It's easier to let her believe I'm fragile than to explain I'm a victim of a crime that sounds made up when you say it out loud. The unexpected consequence I didn't anticipate is that I'm now the person Marcus believed I was. I check my own phone for spyware obsessively. I assume I'm being watched everywhere I go. I lie about small things automatically, even when there's no reason to, because 2 years of performing innocence has rewired my brain. I met someone last week, a man from the domestic violence support group the doctor recommended. He asked for my number and I gave him a fake one. He asked why I seemed so nervous. I said I have trust issues. He said, me too. We sat in silence for 10 minutes, two people who have learned that being seen is the most dangerous thing you can be. The moment of genuine self-awareness that broke through happened yesterday. I was looking for the remote and found another camera, one I hadn't known about, tucked inside the cable box. It was still active, red light blinking. I stared into it for a long time, long enough that whoever might be watching would have seen the exact moment I decided to stop performing. I didn't cover it. I didn't smash it. I just looked into the lens and said, I hope you're getting what you need. Then I walked away. It felt like the first honest thing I'd done in 2 years. I'm telling this story now because I saw their wedding announcement in the mail. It's one of those photo cards, Marcus and Carmen on a beach at sunset, looking impossibly happy. The note says, finally with someone who trusts me. My first thought was that that's the cruelest thing I've ever read. My second thought was that he's right. He can trust Carmen because she's exactly like him. My third thought, the one that made me sit down and write this, is that I was never going to win because I was playing a game I didn't understand against someone who'd rigged the rules. But I kept playing anyway, because I thought if I could just be perfect enough, watchable enough, transparent enough, he'd finally believe I was worthy of being loved without surveillance. What I've learned, imperfectly and with a lot of therapy I still can't really afford, is that you can't prove your innocence to someone who needs you to be guilty. The cameras weren't about catching me. They were about creating a version of me who deserved to be watched. The joke I made didn't cause this. It just gave Marcus permission to do what he'd already decided to do. Carmen didn't betray me. She just saw an exit ramp from her own life and took it, using my relationship as the on-ramp. And I wasn't a perfect victim. I stayed, I schemed. I built a case instead of walking out the door. I became the conspiracy theorist he treated me like. The moral ambiguity is this: I don't know if Marcus ever loved me. I don't know if I loved him, or just loved the idea of being the kind of person who could fix a broken man. I know I said something cruel. I know he did something crueler. I know that somewhere in his cloud storage is footage of me dancing in the kitchen at midnight, making tea, living my small life, and that he probably never watched it because the point wasn't to see me. The point was to make me see myself through his suspicious eyes, and it worked. I spent 2 years becoming a ghost in my own home, and now that he's gone, I can't figure out how to be a person again. I keep thinking about that last camera I found. I could take it down. I could move. I could start over. But some part of me believes I need to keep it there, as a reminder that the only way to win a game like this is to stop playing. Marcus thinks he left me. The truth is, I left myself long before that joke ever crossed my lips. He just finally gave me permission to stop performing for an audience of one. So here's my confession: I said I'd cheat if I could get away with it. What I meant was, I'd give anything to be free, even if it meant becoming the villain in someone else's story. You can decide if that makes me guilty. The cameras are still running.